particularly thank David for the terrific work he's done on Venezuela, which he was really leading the charge there. Thank you very much, David, and was with me in Washington on Monday. I think everybody knows Steve Verheuel, who is our chief NAFTA negotiator, and broadly responsible for trade and trade policy. And since we are here to talk about estimates, we have with us our finance whiz, Arun. And I think Arun is going to be available later on, if there is a later on, to answer further questions. I wanted to start, as Bob said, by making a few opening remarks. Alors, Monsieur le Président, honorable
Mr. Chair, honorable members, I'd like to thank you for having invited me to speak before the Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Development to talk about the way that our government is following up on priorities in the area of foreign affairs.
Thank all the members of the committee for your hard work. I have been traveling a very great deal in recent months and have not seen you all as often as I would like. This committee has played a huge role in traveling to important parts of the world that are increasingly important for Canada, and I would specifically like to thank and single out the committee for the work on the Magnitsky legislation. I think that work, I have supported it all along, but I think the international developments we have seen have really shown how valuable it is to have that tool.
Our government is continuing Canada's long-standing tradition in standing up against intolerance and nativism while responding to legitimate concerns of people who feel left behind by globalization. This means that we need to show constructive leadership on the world stage and in the world order established with our partners to promote peace, security, and prosperity all over the world. Mr. Chair, that is exactly what our government is doing. First, I'd like to talk about our concern regarding the persecution of the Rohingya in Rakhine and the forced displacement of the Rohingya to Bangladesh. Canada's position is clear. No group, population, or community should be victim of persecution or discrimination based on their identity or religion. Canada will not remain silent as populations are deprived of their most fundamental rights because they belong to an ethnic group. We have a moral obligation to act. That is why Canada has announced on May 23rd its strategy in response to the crisis in Myanmar and Bangladesh to take new action and to strengthen existing measures. Canada will grant $300 million over 3 years to international assistance to meet the needs in the area of humanitarian assistance, peace, stabilization, and accountability. This strengthened action by Canada is based on recommendations set out by Bob Ray in his special report. Thank you, Bob. He's done excellent work on this file. It is of crucial importance, and it is an increased contribution by Canada to the international response to this crisis. The honourable members should also know that I went to Bangladesh at the beginning of May for the Council of Foreign Affairs Ministers of the Islamic Cooperation Organization. Canada will continue to work closely with the international community and the UN to go forward. We are taking on our share of the global responsibility to intervene in this crisis and to meet the needs of displaced people who are among the most vulnerable.
the Organization of American States General Assembly with David, where Venezuela was a central topic. The countries in our hemisphere were clear in their overwhelming concern about the crisis. As I said directly to the Venezuelan foreign minister on Monday, the people of Venezuela have Canada's unwavering support in the face of ongoing oppression by the Maduro regime. In response to the recent illegitimate presidential elections, we have downgraded our diplomatic relations with Venezuela and sanctioned a further 14 regime officials, our third round of sanctions. Canadians are committed to standing up for the human rights of Venezuela and for democracy in Venezuela, and our government will continue to do so. Canada also stands with the people of Ukraine, and we continue to condemn Russia's illegal annexation and occupation of Crimea and its ongoing support for the war in eastern Ukraine. In April, I was very pleased to welcome Foreign Minister Pavlo Klimkin to the G7 Foreign Ministers meeting in Toronto and to my home. All G7 countries were clear and firm in their support for the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine. In my last appearance before this committee, I announced the Government of Canada's support for amendments to further strengthen Bill C-47 and Canada's arms export controls. I want to thank the committee for its diligence and hard work on this important legislation. Importantly, the amendments that we will be voting on would require the government to consider the Arms Trade Treaty criteria when assessing the granting of export permits. They would also permit the Minister of Foreign Affairs to deny a permit when there is a substantial risk that the export of the goods would result in the negative consequences of these criteria. These changes would mean that Global Affairs Canada would need to ensure, before authorizing the export of arms, a high level of confidence that the arms will not be used to commit human rights abuses. As I also mentioned to this committee in February, Canada will hold itself in the future to a higher standard on the export of arms to reflect the expectations of Canadians that such exports are not used in the serious violation of human rights. Our reputation as a country with clear and cherished democratic values that stands up for human rights is strong. We must continue to be a global leader and to work to protect these values and rights. I also want to speak briefly about the unprecedented trade action taken by the United States last week. This is not a typical trade dispute. This is the United States using national security considerations as a pretext to impose tariffs not only on Canada, but on all of its closest allies, the members of NATO and Mexico. These tariffs have been imposed on NATO allies of the United States, including Canada, using the absurd argument that somehow the steel and aluminum that we produce poses a national security threat to the United States. This is not only ridiculous, it is also illegal under international trade law. I was in Washington over the past 2 days, and while there, I spoke with senior Republican legislators who have been publicly critical of this action by the U.S. administration. Canada's response has been measured, carefully calibrated, and perfectly reciprocal. Last Thursday, we announced that we will be imposing tariffs on a list of U.S. imports worth $16.6 billion. This is Canada's strongest trade action since the Second World War. Alongside these tariffs, Canada has initiated a case at the WTO, and we have raised a case under Chapter 20 of NAFTA. As supporters of the rules-based international order, including in trade, it was very important for us to take this legal action. In taking and in crafting our responsive measures, we have been working in very close coordination with our allies in the European Union and in Mexico. We will continue to coordinate closely with them. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank the countless Canadians of all political stripes who have come out in support of our strong plan to defend Canadian workers. This really is a matter of the national interest, not partisan politics, as I have heard from very many Canadians who have written in directly to me. Some of them, I'm afraid, beginning their emails by saying they do not vote for the Liberal Party. In particular, I was pleased to see Jason Kenney, Brad Wall, Ronna Ambrose, James Moore, the Canadian Labour Congress, the United Steelworkers, and Unifor voice their support for the strong Canadian response. The Prime Minister and I were also glad to speak to Canada's premiers on Monday. I'm grateful for their support. I was able to brief Premier Moe of Saskatchewan personally ahead of his trip to Washington, where he is even as we speak. And I'd like to thank him for being there and advocating for Canada. On a final note, Mr. Chair, let me conclude with a few words about one of Canada's signature priorities, which you may have heard of, which is happening this week, and that is our G7 presidency and the Leaders Summit. This week and this year is a real opportunity for our country to speak with a strong voice on the international stage. Canada
will mobilize its counterparts on world issues that require pressing attention, especially investing in economic growth that benefits all, preparing for the jobs of the future, working together on climate change, oceans and clean energy, and building a more peaceful and safe world. We will promote the equality of men and women and strengthen women's power. Mr. Chair, I would conclude by stating that in the G7 and the international community as a whole, Canada continues to stand up for an international order that is based on the rule of law and is looking for ways to strengthen it. We do this every time we have the opportunity by taking into account the link between peace, common prosperity, open trade, and human rights.
Thank you very much, colleagues, and I'm happy now to take your questions.
Well, thank you for those opening comments. Now, colleagues, as normal, we'll get right into it, and we'll start with Mr. Allison, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And to our witnesses, thank you. And Mr. Vahul and Minister, thank you for your hard work in this fall. I know you've spent many nights and weekends, and you're probably wondering where your home is now, whether it's Ottawa or Washington. So thank you for that. Last Thursday, the Canadian steel producers stopped shipping orders to the States. Had a chance to meet with them on Monday, as I'm sure you did, Minister, or certainly your boss did. I know the Prime Minister had a meeting with them. They've indicated to us that unless this is resolved, and I know it's very complicated, it's not going to be resolved overnight, that they will probably be reducing production and probably laying people off if a deal is not done. So I get the fact that this is probably going to take some time. I guess my question would be, in response to Table 1, why did we not immediately impose tariffs on the steel? I realize Table 2, there's going to be some things we want to discuss. And given the fact that we knew this was maybe coming, I'm wondering why we didn't do some of that consultation ahead of time. But more importantly, why are we not issuing tariffs on steel and aluminum immediately?
Thank you very much for the question, and thank you very much for your engagement with our steel and aluminum workers. And really, I think that extends to the whole committee and to all parties around this table. I think it's very important for our workers and our industries to feel the strong support of the government and of all Canadians. Part of your question spoke to readiness and preparation, and I want to assure all Canadians, very much including the industry, that Canada was absolutely ready for this action. This is not a U.S. action which we desired. We think it is a very grave mistake, but we were absolutely prepared, and that preparation is manifest in the extensiveness of the list which we published on Thursday. In terms of the timing, a few considerations have played a part in that timing. One is, as I mentioned, a strong view that we are strongest when we work together. The European Union's actions will take effect on July 1st, as will ours, and we think international coordination is very useful in this matter. You referred also to the value of consultations. We share that view, and a public consultation period is particularly valuable both in terms of giving all of our stakeholders in Canada an opportunity to be in touch with us about the list. And let me say, as a bit of a footnote here, I've heard from a lot of MPs directly about concerns in their constituencies, and I'd like to encourage everyone, just send me an email personally. I'm very, very happy to receive it. So having that public period is useful. It's also useful because publishing the list gives the affected American companies and stakeholders and workers an opportunity to see it and to respond. You're quite right also in sort of the thought behind the question that, you know, surely there was an opportunity to consult with stakeholders beforehand. There was, and very many extensive conversations were held, particularly with the steel and aluminum industry prior to Thursday, and I want to thank Steve and his team for leading that. Having said that, public consultation and the publishing of the list, I think, has a very different impact, and it's valuable to have that consultation period.
Okay, well, I'm going to pass my time on. I think that we should have gone immediately on the tariffs. I realize Table 2 needs maybe some consultation, but we'll disagree on that one. I'm going to turn it over to Zayed for another question.
Well, thanks, Minister. You're very busy and got a busy schedule. Thanks. So we appreciate that you were able to put 1 hour here with the committee. You mentioned Magnitsky Law, and eventually it's a very, very powerful tool in the hand of our government and any government to basically put some sanctions against regimes, against some officials that they do really work against, humanity in general and anything that matters to human rights. So we've been hearing Iranian Supreme Leader Khamenei always speak about, on genocide and even his officials. And we're wondering, can you please explain why this tool hasn't been used against Iranian or any Iranian officials yet?
Well, thank you for the question, and let me start by sharing the view that you've just expressed, that the threats that were expressed by the Supreme Leader Khamenei very recently are absolutely abhorrent. We are appalled by them, and Canada and I personally were very public in our denunciation of those remarks. We need to be very clear that Canada is a steadfast friend of Israel, and we absolutely support Israel's right to live in peace. I also want to say on Iran, and this is a matter of great personal importance to me, for me at this moment, any contact that Canada has with Iran has to be focused on the terrible plight of Maryam Mombaini. She is a widow. She is a Canadian citizen. Her sons are in Canada, and she has not only had to live through the terrible and tragic death of her husband, but she is now barred from leaving Iran. I have spoken with Mrs. Mombaini on several occasions. I've also spoken and told her of Canada's strong support. Last week, I also spoke directly with Iran's foreign minister, and I was very clear with him that for Canada, the priority in our conversations with Iran is that Maryam Mombaini must be able to return home.
But where is the wisdom in this whole game here? Okay, they cannot continue doing what they're doing. And we're not really raising the bar enough to be able to show them that we're able to use. I mean, we've got a wonderful tool in our hands. And I think the time has to come beyond diplomacy to use this against this regime and to show them that we're willing to take an action.
Let me just say, and I hope I'm a former journalist, so I hope you won't mind if I quibble about words. I would never call our relationship with a country like Iran a game, particularly since Canadians like Mrs. Mombaini are trapped in that. Canada has a very strong position when it comes to Iran. We are very forceful in our relationship and in the limits we place on that relationship, and that's the right thing to do.
Thank you, Minister. Thanks, Ziad. We'll go to Mr. Sani, please.
Bonjour, Madame Ministre. Nous avons...
Good evening, Minister. Recently, we've had a number of examples in which the international order, based on the rule of law, has been severely tested, notably by authoritarianism and human rights violations, humanitarian crisis, a lack of respect for international law and standards. We know that Canada is a strong supporter of the rules-based international order that it helped build. As G7 President for 2018, how is Canada working with its partners and allies to ensure that that international order be respected? Thank you for the question, Raj. As an Anglophone as well, who is trying to improve her French, I would like to begin by congratulating you on your French. Thank you. Madame Laverdière, I hope you're pleased. I think you're the only Francophone here, perhaps someone else as well. Raj, I absolutely agree with you. For Canada, the rules-based international order is an essential principle, more important today than ever. I think the G7 summit is a wonderful opportunity for our country to work with our allies to support the international order based on rules, and also to talk with Canadians about this issue. Because for us, parliamentarians, I think it's clear to us why it's necessary. But it might not be something that Canadians see in their daily lives. And I think the summit is a real opportunity for us to highlight the importance of this issue of international institutions for all Canadians and for the whole world. And if I can return to the first question, tariffs on aluminum and steel, these illegal tariffs are an example of the importance of truly having a rules-based international order. And it's the importance of organizations like the WTO, which have Canada's support. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Minister, I want to address an issue that has been a focus of our work on the Subcommittee for International Human Rights, and something that our government and you have been at the forefront of, and that is calling for the protection of the Rohingya and an end to their persecution. You have said on many occasions that this is ethnic cleansing and that the perpetrators responsible must be brought to justice. Most recently, you visited Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh with Special Envoy Bob Rae to see the situation firsthand. In addition, last month, our government made an important announcement to help the affected populations in the region. Can you update this committee on how Canada is continuing to help the Rohingya and what actions our government is taking?
Well, thank you very much, Michael, for the question. And I have to say, particularly when I am outside Canada or talking with colleagues from other countries about the Rohingya issue, it makes me really proud to be Canadian. Because if anything, our government has faced from the opposition parties on both the left and the right support for a strong position on the Rohingya. And if anything, I feel from the opposition parties the idea that Canada should be doing ever more. And I must say, as Canada's foreign minister, that's a great position to be in. I think we may be the only country in the world that has certainly the only non-Muslim majority country in the world, where there is such a strong and united national sense that these people, among the most wretched in the world, deserve our country's strong support. And I'm sure that the other members of Parliament who are gathered around this table, I would imagine you all have experienced what I have, which is strong support in my own constituency. You know, people actually come up to me on the street and thank me for the strong position Canada is taking on this issue. So if Canadians are listening to the proceedings of this committee, I don't know how many are, Chair, but maybe a few, I would just like to say thank you, and thank you, Canada. I think it shows one of the great qualities of our country. I've spoken already a little bit, Michael, about the announcement that we made about 10 days ago of Canada's stepped-up action in support of the Rohingya, the $300 million over 3 years. And maybe I can speak a little bit about our efforts to ensure accountability for those who are responsible for what, I agree with you, Michael, are crimes against humanity, are ethnic cleansing. I spoke this morning with one of my new friends on the international scene, Minister Ali, the Foreign Minister of Bangladesh. On the Rohingya issue, we are developing a very strong partnership with Bangladesh, and Minister Ali and the Prime Minister of Bangladesh, Sheikh Hasina, will be coming to Canada for the outreach session of the G7 summit. And we agreed that we would spend some time talking about the Rohingya issue. Canada is leading the creation of a contact group of countries whose permanent representatives to the UN will be meeting in New York this week to get some collective action on the Rohingya. I would also like to thank Japan and my colleague, Foreign Minister Taro Kono. Japan, as the sole Asian country which is a member of the G7, I think is able to play and is playing a particularly useful role in this issue. And I've spoken about it often with Minister Kono. I spoke with him, in fact, just on Tuesday about the Rohingya issue and ways in which Japan is working directly in conversation with Myanmar to try to push the issue from that direction. On the accountability front, people here are aware that we have sanctioned the general who we believe is directly responsible for these atrocious acts. I think it's also worth pointing out, and this is something that was particularly appalling to me and I think may not be widely appreciated. When I was in Cox's Bazar a month ago, I met with Rohingya refugees who had arrived there just a week earlier. So this is an atrocity which is ongoing. There continue to be Rohingya who are fleeing across the border to Bangladesh. And a person has to really be in a truly dreadful situation to choose this very, very difficult thing of becoming a refugee, of walking to what is, you know, certainly the people of...
Sure,
I have to stop now? Okay, I'm sorry. I care a lot about the Rohingya
just to try,
so.
I know, just to keep it sort of fair for everyone else, we'll go to Madame Laverdière, s'il vous plaît.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Minister, for being with us this evening. I'd like to begin by highlighting that I agree with you that in the face of the decision by the Trump administration, coordination and cooperation with our other allies is absolutely essential. I'd also like to thank you for your offer to send emails. I will take you up on that, perhaps for a number of topics, especially since you know we had a problem with the letters I wrote to you. There were many of them that I didn't receive a response for. I'm still waiting for a few of them, so I look forward to receiving your response to my letters. Third point, very briefly, on the issue of the Rohingya. And of course, we share your concern. They are facing many challenges. A challenge we are facing with another tragic situation is what is happening in Yemen. And there we also need to provide assistance and accountability. It's absolutely essential. But I'd like to talk about Bill C-47, the Arms Trade Treaty implementation. Of course, there are a few small improvements, and we're pleased to see those improvements. But in my opinion, there are still huge gaps in the bill. There's the issue of the sale of arms to the United States. I know there are 33,000 Canadians who have written to you on this topic to ask you to close the loopholes. So I was wondering if you'd been informed of those 33,000 Canadians who've written to you over the past 10 days or 2 weeks on this topic. Thank you. You've touched on a number of issues. I want to make a few small comments before talking about C-47. To begin, I'd like to thank you and thank the NDP for its support for Canada's strong action last week. This morning I spoke with Jagmeet Singh and I thanked him directly. It truly is a national issue, and I'm very pleased that we have a Team Canada approach. When I was in Washington yesterday and Monday, a number of people told me that it's surprising to them that it's possible for us to have issues that are not partisan. I agree with you that the situation of the Rohingya, as I've already said, is a very important issue, and it's an issue that I think Canada can make a difference for. And thank you for raising the issue of Yemen. It's also a serious humanitarian crisis, and Canada's actively engaged. You mentioned Bill C-47. And I'd also like to thank the entire committee for its work on this bill. As you know, our government decided to improve the act. Perhaps we haven't done everything that critics would have liked to see, but we've made changes that are substantial, and I think these changes have improved the act. And it demonstrates the importance of committee work. You raised in particular the issue of trade with the Americans without permits. As you've said, our ties in the area of trade and security with the United States are special. Canada and the United States are NATO and NORAD partners, and we have an industrial and defense base that is integrated. Now, more than ever, it is important to highlight that reality. The Arms Trade Treaty does not exclude accelerated processes for certain countries. For example, Benelux countries have a free flow of controlled goods. I'd like to highlight one thing that's very important for me. The changes that we've made to C-47 have strengthened the bill for a number of reasons. We've included criteria for the Arms Trade Treaty directly in the Canadian law. We've introduced a legal obligation for the government to refuse export permits for arms that would violate those criteria. Those are substantive changes, and I'm proud of them. Despite those changes, Controlled Arms Coalition, which is very well recognized, last week once again expressed its grave concerns about Canada's approach to the implementation of the treaty on the arms trade. And it said that it hopes that this situation will be resolved. And that leads me to another point. I wonder if I could ask for your help, Minister. We'll see. There are a number of MPs during the debate on C-47, a number of Liberal MPs in the House said that Amnesty International and Controlled Arms now supported Bill C-47 by saying that Amnesty and others appreciate the small changes that have been made. And I know that our partners, groups like Amnesty International, Controlled Arms, Project Plowshare, the Rideau Institute, continue to oppose this bill. And a number of these organizations are very frustrated to see that their opinions are misrepresented by Liberal MPs in the House. So if you could get that message out, that those organizations remain opposed to Bill C-47 and will not support Bill C-47. Thank you, Madame Laverdière.
Morris?
Minister, following up on Raj's question about threats to our international rules-based order, last week during the NATO Parliamentary Assembly in Warsaw, Poland, Secretary General Stoltenberg lauded Canada for our very significant contributions to NATO security on NATO's military front line in Eastern Europe, in Estonia, Romania, and particularly, he noted, in Ukraine. He expressed the view that Canada's unifier mission was integral to NATO's overall security structure. As you stated in your opening, Canada is an unwavering friend and ally of Ukraine. However, the territorial sovereignty and integrity of Ukraine continues to be threatened on a daily basis by widespread shelling in the Donbass and the territorial integrity assailed by the continuing illegal military occupation of Crimea. Can you update our committee on how Canada stands in solidarity with the people of Ukraine, Ukraine's territorial integrity, in response to Russia's lethal aggressions?
Well, thank you very much, Borisa, for that question. And I would like to take this opportunity to really thank you for your commitment over many, many years to the Ukrainian issue, and something that perhaps not everyone is familiar with, the fact that you have been speaking up for the Crimean Tatars for many, many years. This is a group of people who have experienced severe repression for a very long time, and they are among the chief victims of Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine and annexation of Crimea. I'm grateful to you for your support for them, and I think it is really important that Canada stands up for them as we do. I'm also really glad that you mentioned Jan Stoltenberg's comments. I do think he is a person with whom Canada has a very close connection. In fact, I think he was one of the first people who called to congratulate me when I became Foreign Minister of Canada. And we have a very close conversation with him. I think it's useful to use this moment at committee to be sure that Canadians appreciate just how much Canada is contributing today to NATO and to the support of our friends and allies in Europe. Canada is, as you mentioned, Boris, one of the 4 lead countries of the Enhanced Forward Presence mission in Poland and the Baltic states. We are the lead country in Latvia, and that is something which is appreciated not only by Latvia, but across the region. Last week, the Prime Minister of Estonia was here, and he made that point explicitly to me. He said, you know, Canadian women and men are in Latvia, but that supports all of us, and we really, really appreciate it. Canada is present in Romania, and the Unifier mission in Ukraine is both a very important symbol of Canada's support for Ukraine and has tremendous practical value in training the Ukrainian men and women in uniform. I think there could be sort of no better confirmation of the value of our work there than the fact that Sweden has now chosen to join us and will be sending Swedish troops to join the Canadians in that training mission. That is a really good sign that what we're doing really helps. I mentioned in my remarks the significance of inviting Foreign Minister Pavlo Klimkin to be a guest and to speak directly with the G7 foreign ministers. We began the G7 foreign ministers meeting with a breakfast in my house. It was ministers only. And after a beginning conversation among the ministers, Pavlo joined us and was able to speak very directly to the G7 foreign ministers about the situation in Ukraine. I heard from many of my G7 colleagues how much they valued being able to have such a direct conversation with Minister Klimkin, and it was really a moment when we heard very strong support from the G7 for Ukraine. That was reflected in the statement by the G7 foreign ministers. I know that this is an issue that will be raised at the Leaders Summit, and I met with Secretary Mike Pompeo in Washington on Monday, and we also discussed the issue of Ukraine and ways that Canada and the United States can work together on it.
Thank you,
Go
Minister
to,
Christie.
Madam Vandenbeld, please.
Thank you, Minister, for being here, and thank you for mentioning in your opening remarks the escalating humanitarian and political crisis in Venezuela. We know that the Maduro regime is increasing its human rights abuses, dismantling of democratic institutions, attacks on opposition members and parties, undermining of the parliament, stacking of the courts, and attacks on civil society. On May 20th, you yourself, as well as many members of the Lima Group, said that the elections there were completely fraudulent. You've downgraded our diplomatic relationship. And last week, Erwin Kotler was here, and he provided the report from the panel of international experts that was created under the OAS Secretary General, which found reasonable grounds that crimes against humanity have occurred: extrajudicial executions, arbitrary detentions, torture, rape, and other forms of sexual violence. I know that you just returned from the OAS, and I know that you are taking a leading role in this, and I was wondering if you could please update the committee on what measures Canada is and will be taking.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Anita. Thank you for your work on the committee. And, you know, like Boris, you're a person who has been committed to these issues for many, many years, and I'm really grateful for that and appreciate your expertise. You're right that the situation in Venezuela has been a particular focus for our government. And again, here I'd like to take this opportunity to share with members of the committee, but also with Canadians more generally, the extent to which Canadian leadership on this issue is very much appreciated throughout our hemisphere. There are only 2 G7 countries in our hemisphere. Canada is one of them. And the fact that Canada is devoting so much focused attention to the situation in Venezuela, the fact that Canada is such an energetic member of the Lima Group, I think means a very great deal to Venezuelans who are suffering a loss of their democratic and human rights. And I think it also is very heartening to our other friends and allies in the hemisphere who see that not only is Canada with them in principle, but that we are really prepared to devote the sweat equity to act on the principles that bring together the members of the Organization of American States. Our meeting on Monday of the OAS, which, as I said, David was there with me, and we're lucky to have him in the department because of his deep expertise in Latin America. I've heard a lot of people praising you, David, for that, so thank you very much. That was an important meeting. It was an opportunity for the members of the Lima Group to speak directly to the Venezuelan government, to the Venezuelan foreign minister, and to make clear our absolute commitment to democracy for the people of Venezuela. I think that having that sort of a direct exchange has a real impact. And again, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank in particular our Caribbean friends, for whom this can be a particularly difficult issue. And they are joining us. We share democratic values with very many of our longtime Canadian friends in the Caribbean, and I would really like to thank those who are joining us in the work of the Lima Group. That's particularly important.
Thank
and
you,
this
Minister.
again, I have to stop talking. I'm sorry.
I'm going to have to cut you off. I hate to do that, but then we'll go to Mr. Sadhu, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Minister, for taking time out of your busy schedule. I'll touch upon Russia. We had several concrete examples of Russia's continued flaunting of international norms and standards, especially its involvement in the recent nerve agent attack in the United Kingdom, its support for murderous Assad regime in Syria. As a strong defender of the rules-based international order, Canada has decided to make Russia the key element of G7 presidency. So I was wondering what Canada has done so far to deter Russia, and what with your allied at the G7 countries are going to do or expect to take action against Russia.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for the question, Jody. And actually, this gives me an opportunity to acknowledge another official, Mark Wozdecki. Are you still here, Mark? Did he leave? There he is. There's Mark Wozdecki. He's Director of Policy in the department. And actually, just as I was walking in here, I was asking Mark how we were doing on some of those issues in the communique. This is indeed, has been a focus of Canadian foreign policy for some time and has been a major theme in our G7 year. As you mentioned, the G7 foreign ministers met shortly after the Salisbury attack, which was yet another gross violation of international norms by Russia. In fact, the G7 was able to act before the foreign ministers' meeting with a strong G7 statement in solidarity with our British partners and allies condemning this attack. I know that was very much appreciated by the United Kingdom, and I think that a very powerful message was sent following that Salisbury attack by the very strong action by the international community, including Canada, in expelling Russian diplomats in response. So I think that that demonstration of international unity was very powerful and was an example of Canada using our G7 presidency this year to really play a leadership role in bringing together that coalition and in supporting democracy and the sovereignty of our allies. I mentioned earlier and thanked this committee for its work on the Magnitsky legislation, and that, of course, has also been an important additional tool which we have in our diplomatic toolbox and have been able to use as well with regard to our policy towards Russia. Canada has been very closely engaged and supportive of our partners, the Netherlands and Australia, in the recent report about the MH17 tragedy. Another important example, and an example, as we have discussed with regard to the Rohingya, of the importance of the rules-based order, of the importance of gathering evidence, of the importance and value of establishing accountability. And that is an issue which Canada is following very closely, will continue to follow closely, and I think an important issue which is emerging during this, our G7 presidency year. I'd like to just make a final point, which was certainly an element of the G7 foreign ministers meeting, and I expect will be an important issue when the G7 leaders meet very soon. And that is the importance of standing up for and defending our democracies against foreign interference. Something which we are encountering, particularly from Russia, is a very orchestrated attempt to undermine our democratic institutions from the inside, to undermine the credibility and effectiveness of how our democracies work. And it's very important for us as Canadians to be aware of this issue and to work hard to stand up for our democracies. And I intentionally say us as Canadians, not just as parliamentarians. It's an issue which I discussed with the Estonian Prime Minister last week. And he brought with him his official who's specifically in charge of countering cyber threats from Russia. And this official said, well, you know, it's maybe easier in Estonia than in other countries because our public is very prepared for this and so has the natural defenses. And I think that that is a lesson that all of the democracies can and must learn from countries like our partners in the Baltic states, from countries like Ukraine, because this is a threat which maybe began in the Baltic states, began in Ukraine, but is very much an issue for us here in Canada. And I think that it's an important issue for the world's leading industrial democracies. That's what the G7 is to be addressing, and we are seeing that action, and Canada is very much playing a leading role there.
Thank you, Minister. Now we'll go to Mr. Janis, please.
Thank you, Minister. I think in the opposition we agree with many of the words you've said, and it's our job, I guess, to challenge areas where we think there's some dissonance between the words and the actions. I want to start by asking you a question about Ukraine. The National Post obtained figures from your department which show that spending on election monitoring was over $8 million in the 2014-2015 year. It's now under $700,000. As you know, Ukraine has elections next year. Why the cuts to election monitoring?
You asked that question because the cuts to funding for election monitoring were actually cuts made by the Conservative government of Stephen Harper. And I want to assure members of this committee and all Canadians that our government is absolutely committed to restoring the funding for election monitoring.
Minister, I'm sorry to just jump in. In terms of what you said about Stephen Harper, Minister, I do control the time.
I'm not. I haven't finished my answer.
Mr. Chair, I control the time.
Finished my answer.
Can I just clarify the question?
No, I'm
$8 million in 2014, 2015, $700,000 this year. So you can't blame Stephen Harper when there was over $8 million in 2014, 2015.
Mr. Chair, I'm sorry. I think the mic has to be cut off, please.
Please. Yeah, that's a good idea. When I've got control of the mic, we should shut this mic off, please. There you go. Okay. Minister, you'll finish your comments, and then Mr. Janis, you get to ask another question or make a comment. So let's do this like adults. That would be useful. Yes, it is how the process works. Go ahead, Minister.
Thank you. And I'm happy to take your questions, but I'd ask you to behave as the other members of the committee do and listen to the answer. So I am glad to take this opportunity here to make an absolute commitment to all Canadians and to the people of Ukraine that Canada will be energetically engaged in election monitoring in Ukraine next year. The elections in Ukraine next year are an absolutely critical moment, and we will be there.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think members know that the way this committee typically proceeds is that the member posing the questions directs the time of the questions. It seems that the chair wants to proceed in a different fashion today. Let me then move on to some other questions. Certainly, first of all, with regard to that other question, the figures I quoted were clear, and the public record is clear in terms of what was spent in the 2014-15 period and what is being spent now. I want to ask, Minister, during a recent meeting of the committee, we were told by officials that the government does not fund organizations that are engaged in illegal activity abroad, that is, activity that is illegal in the country where it is taking place. Is that correct, that the government does not fund activity which is illegal in the country where it's taking place?
To the best of my knowledge, it is.
Minister, the budget gave $5 million to Marie Stopes International. Is the government confident that Marie Stopes International does not break the law in countries where it operates?
Let me be very clear on the direction of that question. We have a feminist prime minister. I am a feminist, and I am proud that we have a feminist foreign policy. I believe it is an absolute right of women to control their bodies. I believe that sexual and reproductive health for women is their right. I believe that is a right for Canadian women, and I am proud to stand up for women around the world to have that right. We, sadly, are living in a time when the sexual and reproductive rights of women in some countries in the world are being limited. That is wrong. And as you know, Canada has stepped up its support for sexual and reproductive health for women, in part to fill that void. That is something our government is extremely proud to do. And if the Conservative Party believes that a woman should not have control of her own body, whether she is Canadian or a citizen of any other country, I would be quite delighted to take that position to the voters of Canada.
Minister, if I can just clarify the question. I think Canadians just have a right to know one way or the other about the policy of the government with respect to funding activity that's illegal in other countries. You said in the previous question that, to your knowledge, Canada is not funding activity that it's illegal in the country where it takes place. Of course, I know that your government advocates for changes to the law, and that's normal. Obviously, Canada would advocate for changes to the law in cases where it doesn't agree. But are you confident that Marie Stopes International, receiving $5 million of Canadian money, does not break the law in countries where they operate? Are you confident of that?
I, again, want to address the underlying point which is being insinuated and pushed there, and I would like Canadians to be very aware of the tendency of that question. Again, if the Conservative Party of Canada wants to stand up before Canadian voters and say that it is a party which is opposed to a woman's right to choose in Canada, that it is a party which is opposed to support for sexual and reproductive health of women around the world, I would be delighted to take that issue to the ballot box. And I also want to say, in this year, the year of Me Too, the year when the people of Ireland, the women of Ireland, but the people of Ireland have spoken up in a free and open ballot for a woman's right to choose, I am extremely proud to be very, very clear about our government's support for choice. And again, I would be delighted to have the Conservative Party, rather than make insinuations. If you are opposed to abortion, if you want to limit a woman's right to choose in Canada or around the world, please come out and say it clearly.
One final question, Minister, about the issue of foreign interference in elections. I think, again, the public record will show the answer that was given and the question that was asked. With respect to C-76, this is a bill the government's put forward that references the issue of foreign interference in the election. I know this is something you're concerned about, that you've personally been a victim of to some extent. Now, when the law allows a foreign entity to transfer money to a Canadian organization outside of the writ period, And the Canadian organization, as long as that foreign money is mingled with its own money, they can then use that money in the process of the election because it's then now become part of their organization. So theoretically, the Russian government could give a Canadian organization millions of dollars, and as long as it was mingled with Canadian money outside of an election, that could be used during an election. That's the present reality under C-76. So given the concerns you've raised, do you think C-76 as presently written, it has sufficient tools to address the possibility of foreign interference in Canadian elections?
Let me just say, first of all, I do think that we as members of this committee, while we may disagree about issues like a woman's right to choose, I think we all do strongly agree on the importance of defending and standing up for Canadian democracy. And I would like to commend my colleague Corinna Gould for the great work she has been doing in that space. And I really believe this is important to get the legislation right. It's also absolutely important to have the right public conversation about this. As I said in my earlier answer, referring to the conversation with the Estonian Prime Minister, a lot of this is about Canada having the right laws. A lot of this is about Canada having the tools to detect and fight back against cyber interference, and that's an area that Minister Goodale is working at very effectively. A big part of this as well is public consciousness and public awareness. And this is an area where I think we as members of Parliament all have a shared responsibility to have a conversation with Canadians, have a conversation with our constituents, and be sure that we are all prepared to push back against that interference. I just want to say one last thing. I had the privilege of being with the Prime Minister at the bilateral meeting today with Emmanuel Macron. And I think the French election was an example of a very enlightened public, of a very enlightened and responsible media pushing back against foreign interference. And I'd like to congratulate the people of France. We can learn a lot from them.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dennis. Minister, the last question goes to Mr. Sani, and that'll complete 2 rounds and our discussion with the Minister. Mr. Sani.
Depuis l'arrivée de notre gouvernement au
Since the arrival of our government into office, we've adopted a feminist foreign policy. Can you explain to this committee why that is so important and how this feminist foreign policy breaks down in your priorities? Another question in French. Thank you. I think I've already touched on the theme of feminism and the importance of having a feminist international policy. Regarding our government's policy, there are a number of aspects. One aspect is the policy of feminist international development that my colleague Marie-Claude Bibeau is promoting. It's a very important strategy, a strategy that has already started to change the lives of women and girls around the world. And there's a lot of international interest in this strategy. Many countries are paying close attention to what Canada is doing and are very interested in it. We also have a feminist international policy. One example is the issue of women, peace, and security. We have an initiative that is ongoing in the area of peacekeeping, and Canada is now actively engaged and working to have more women in peacekeeping in the UN. It is a structural change that Canada is working on. We have many international partners with whom we are working, And I also see the beginning of a change here. The G7 Leaders Summit will be another opportunity for Canada to raise the issues of women, of gender equality, and the meeting with the Equality Council will be an important opportunity. As I announced during the foreign ministers meeting for the G7, I, along with Cecilia Malmström, have decided together to call for a meeting in September with all women ministers of foreign affairs in the world. There is a great deal of interest in the world in this meeting. In fact, during the G7 foreign ministers meeting, we held a dinner with a small group of foreign affairs ministers who are women. And I invited other ministers, foreign affairs ministers of the G7. Federica, who is of course a woman, was with us. But Mr. Kono, Japan's foreign affairs minister, decided to join us as well. And this meeting was so interesting for him that he told me on Tuesday, well, he asked me if it would be possible for him to attend the meeting along with us at that Women, Females, Foreign Affairs Ministers meeting. I said, of course, yes, I will invite all female foreign affairs ministers of the world, as well as G7 foreign affairs ministers, whether they are women or not. So it's an important part of our foreign affairs policy. And I'd like to add one other small example. David was with me in Washington during the meeting of the OAS. And the new foreign affairs minister of Costa Rica was there. She's the first female foreign affairs minister. And she explained that Costa Rica's government has decided to have a cabinet with gender parity. And during the meeting with me, she told me that the inspiration for that decision came from our Prime Minister's decision in 2015. So we all need to understand that our example here in Canada can have an effect around the world.
I think that wraps up our 2 rounds, and it's been 1 hour and 10. So I think we've exhausted our time with the Minister. And so I want to take this opportunity to thank the Minister for answering our questions, and looking forward to seeing her again in the committee in the very near future. Colleagues, we're going to suspend for 5 minutes, and then there's about 30 to 40 minutes before we get there's going to be bells in about 10 or 15 minutes, and it'll be half an hour bell. So we've got a good 30, 40 minutes for officials. And so,
don't make us miss the vote, Bob. We'll all be in trouble with our whips.
We're watching it right here on TV, live on the very small one I've got here in front of me. So we're all very good. So we'll suspend for 5, and then we'll go to the officials, and we'll ask some questions, as is the normal process. So thank you very much. So, colleagues, this meeting is now back in session, and in front of us we have the officials who are from Global Affairs, and maybe what we could do, Heather, start from you and go across and introduce yourself and sort of your title for the record, and then we'll go, as it works here now, straight to questions. And colleagues, I think this is going to go till 8 o'clock, so this is a short version. So let's try and keep our questions and our answers succinct, and we'll move along at a fairly good pace. And I think we'll all get out of here around 8-ish, and so that would work, I think, for all of us. And so I'll turn the floor over to Mr. Jennis to start it off. But first, before that, we'll start with Heather.
Hello, my name is Heather Jeffrey. I'm the Assistant Deputy Minister for Consular Security and Emergency Management.
And my name is Mark Wasdecki. I'm the Assistant Deputy Minister for International Security and Political Affairs, and also carry the title of Political Director.
Bonsoir, Martin Benjamin, je suis ministre adjoint pour les Amériques.
Tim Benjamin, Acting Assistant Deputy Minister, Americas.
Please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the officials for being here. A few questions, some new, some in follow-up to what was discussed earlier. I just want to ask about this issue of Air Canada changing their designation from Taiwan to Taiwan, Canada. I'd like to know if Air Canada at any time sought the government's advice or support in its dealings with the Chinese government, and if so, what the response from the government of Canada was.
Oh, sir.
Mr. Chair, if you don't mind, we have our colleague here that covers Asia.
Yeah, for sure. Ms. Taylor, please, I think is going to answer the question.
Sarah Taylor, I'm the Director General for North Asia and Oceania. And no, to my knowledge, Air Canada did not seek our advice before making that decision.
Okay, thank you very much. On the issue of the Rohingya, there was some discussion, but I have to say I don't share the, I guess, the general good feeling about what we've been able to do on Rohingya. I appreciate that there's members of multiple parties concerned about this, and there's been a lot of discussion about it here. But we have an unfolding genocide that we haven't been able to stop or hold people accountable for, and we have the application of similar techniques in the abuse of other minorities in Burma, the Chin, the Kachin, others, and the Burmese military and government continue to act with relative impunity. I would like to understand why only one person has been sanctioned. The House of Commons unanimously agreed to a motion calling for new sanctions against responsible actors. The minister mentioned one person being sanctioned who she perceived as most directly responsible, but the commander-in-chief of the armed forces hasn't even been sanctioned. So I wonder if the officials can share with us why there has not been a stronger response in terms of sanctioning those responsible.
So, as the Minister mentioned, indeed we have put in place a number of measures to address the Rohingya crisis, and that's an ongoing and evolving file that we're continuing to follow and to address, and continuing to advocate for perpetrators of gross human rights violations and abuses to be held to account. We're working closely with other countries to find, and with international organizations and civil society, looking for the right pathway to establish accountability for the atrocities committed, and also trying to work on efforts to achieve justice and lasting peace in Myanmar.
I understand that, but I mean, at a basic level, isn't it fairly clear-cut that the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces is responsible for a genocide being perpetrated by the armed forces which he controls?
Sorry, I couldn't hear the full question.
I guess I'm trying to understand why we've been so absent when it comes to sanctions against the Burmese government or military with respect to the Rohingya crisis. And I guess what I just asked is, isn't it isn't it fairly easy to draw the conclusion that the Commander-in-Chief, Min Aung Hlaing, of the Burmese Armed Forces, who commands the army that is committing a genocide, is responsible to some degree?
Okay. Thank you. So, as I said, there are a number of other organizations that are involved in this, and so we are in ongoing discussions with international organizations and other countries about accountability and how best to address accountability. I would mention also that actually Canada does have in place already a number of sanctions, a sanctions regime against the government of Myanmar. So there are a number of existing sanctions that were in place that reflect some of our previous and ongoing concerns about democracy and rule of law in Myanmar.
Yeah, I think members are aware that there are existing sanctions. There was a unanimous motion of the House of Commons calling for the imposition of tough new sanctions, and I understand discussions are ongoing. It's just that if we're going to have an effective international regime to combat genocide and crimes against humanity, we have to be able to react in real time. And I guess just an observation that I've only been a member of Parliament for 2.5 years. We've dealt with two instances, major instances of genocide, one in Burma, one in Daesh-controlled areas of Syria and Iraq, and the international community hasn't, and Canada haven't even been able to sort of clarify that genocide is happening in those cases. So it's a source of ongoing frustration for me as an MP that's concerned about these issues. Just jumping around a bit, could we hear a little bit about, please, the situation in Nicaragua and what Canada's response has been to that?
That's a very good question. So our government is quite concerned about the situation in Nicaragua. We are actually, working with both parties that, like we want to see a dialogue between the opposition and some of those groups and the government. So that there's, there are many roads being blocked right now throughout the country. And that's a situation that worries us. There's been protests, like manifestations, and there were a few people killed. So this is a situation that is evolving. I think all the parties are asking for a robust dialogue between both parties, and that we are actually sponsoring. And there were discussions at the OAS in the last 2 days. All the members of member states of the hemisphere are concerned about the situation, and we're watching with close attention. But there's an ongoing dialogue right now that we're hoping will resolve those issues.
Thank you. Mr. Janice, I'll go to Mr. Sani, please.
Good evening. Thank you very much for coming. I have a general question to ask of you, and it's based basically on your departmental plan for 2018-2019. And I'm reminded today that today's D-Day. And after the Second World War, as you're aware, Bretton Woods happened, and the liberal international order was set up to prevent further war, but also to provide economic growth across the world in a rules-based system. And as you know, that growth has not been even in different parts of the world. If you look at sub-Saharan Africa, 50% of the world's poorest live there. And one of your core priorities, your priority number one in your departmental plan, states that one of the objectives is to strengthen the rules-based international order. How do you propose the department will do that?
Thank you. That's a very big question, and as the Minister mentioned earlier, it was and continues to be the subject of discussion, including in the G7, where G7 foreign ministers took a very clear decision that we would stand up collectively for that international rules-based order, and that we would confront the threats to our democracies and these systems, both those threats that come externally and those that we need to do domestically in terms of demonstrating to the people of our countries that our democracies are working for them and delivering for them. But we also faced external threats, and we have committed and recommitted ourselves to bolstering the institutions that underpin that rules-based order. We've also committed to calling out activities of hostile actors when they act against us. That's the reason why the G7 foreign ministers agreed to establish a mechanism where we would be working collectively together to identify threats, examples of foreign interference, and work to coordinate our responses to those.
The second question I have is also from your Department of Plan, and having just recently come back from Japan, South Korea, and the Philippines, and having had the great opportunity to go to China, Vietnam, Hong Kong, and Indonesia in the fall, one of the things that we've noticed in that region of the world, especially in Southeast Asia, is the fact that right now trade groups are forming. So you had ASEAN, then you had ASEAN +3, then you have ASEAN +6. Now you have RCEP that's being currently negotiated. So I know that we have started preliminary talks as a country with ASEAN, but it seems to me that ASEAN right now is focused on RCEP and is saying, let us negotiate with RCEP, let's get that done, and then we'll discuss this with you. Is there any appetite? Because one of your third core priority in that departmental plan is pursuing a progressive trade agenda. So I'm just wondering, what's the department's opinion in terms of, rather than waiting for ASEAN, would it be more opportune to look at RCEP or look at some version of that? I've even heard it spoken that, you know, when you look at the Asia-Pacific countries, and you look at the Indo-Pacific area specifically, that maybe there should be a free trade area of the Asia-Pacific. And to expand that to include as many countries as possible, rather than trying to do bilateral deals, that we could do something multilaterally and, you know, kill all birds with one stone.
I would agree with Mr. Chair. I would agree with the statement that this is a region that has huge opportunities for Canada. Many of our major trade partners and that are growing in importance for us. We actually have already one deal almost in hand. It's before the House now to ratify, which is of course CPTPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. That will bind us into a free trade agreement with a number of major economies in the region, notably Japan, our fourth largest trading partner, but also a number of ASEAN countries are members of CPTPP. So that is for us a first and important step. I think there's been some suggestions of RCEP being somehow a rival to CPTPP. It's a different set of players, but I think there's potential for them to be complementary. There is some overlap in membership, so we're certainly following with interest the progress on RCEP. It's a slightly less ambitious deal probably than CPTPP, but again of interest, and certainly a shared goal for all in the region is ultimately a free trade area of Asia Pacific, which is one of the goals that has been expressed collectively and through our membership in APEC, in Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation.
Okay. My final question is regarding your peace and stabilization programs, and I know that you funded that. Your 2016-2017 departmental results list a number of cases where the money was set aside for the clearance of explosive devices, including in places such as Iraq and the Ukraine. This past December, the government announced an additional $12 million towards the clearance of landmines. Can you please provide some detail as to where the money is being spent and what projects are being funded with these additional funds?
I thank the member for his question. The Peace and Stabilization Program is a vital program that very few countries have. Not even every G7 country has a program like this. It's a program that focuses on the part of the spectrum that most conflict and fragile countries are most vulnerable to. That is, before they're stable enough to benefit from development assistance, they're going through a period of great fragility, and they need basic assistance to help them effectively get up and running. And the stabilization involves helping newly liberated territories, for example, in Iraq, get their basic services up and running, whether water or electricity, helps demine those areas so that people can live safely. That includes removing explosive ordnance and booby traps and whatnot. We have a number of those programs up and running in Iraq. We are supporting some demining in the liberated zones of Syria. and elsewhere around the world. But this program focuses on a broad range of stabilization activities that complements our development assistance dollars and our humanitarian assistance dollars. So it means that Canada is a full service provider, if you will, in terms of the states that most need our assistance.
Thank you very much.
Colleagues, you're going to hear the bells start here shortly. It's a 30-minute bell, so we got time, and we'll go to Madame Lavidière, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, former colleagues, for a number of you. My first question is, would it be possible for the department to send us the state of expenditures in terms of what has been allocated for elections monitoring since 2012-2013, including budgetary forecasts for the current fiscal year?
Happy to provide it to the committee.
Please, we'll get that provided to the committee. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Second question. Could you confirm whether CIFTA, the new agreement between Canada and Israel in the area of trade, which was recently renovated and re-signed, improved, whether it respects Resolution 2324 of the United Nations, especially the section that requires, and we know that Canada is bound by the UN Security Council resolutions, which requires a distinction between Israel's territory and the occupied territories.
For the record, and please go ahead and answer the question.
Thank you very much. Troy Lalashnik, I'm Director General of, thank you very much, Director General of Israel, Palestinian Territories, Northern Africa. Merci de votre question.
Thank you for your question.
We just signed a modernized free trade agreement between Canada and Israel, and this was the subject of many events as it was launched in Canada this week. With respect to the issues of the definitions and the scope, the modernization did not change in any way how the coverage of the free trade agreement, and particularly in respect of the question related to definitions, and so it didn't touch it at all. The modernization was really designed to look at the new chapters and the new ways in which we can facilitate trade, and one of the important features of that agreement and the extension was the dispute resolution mechanisms and the gender component. And so the Minister of International Trade has said this week that this modernization is the first one in the world and really a guide for all future ones.
So may I see from your response that the current free trade agreement does not conform to UN Security Council Resolution 2334?
Well, I'll say that the free trade agreement that has been in place since the 1990s continues to be in place, and that the modernization didn't affect our definitions or the territories within which the trade is executed.
Okay, I didn't get a clear response, but I think we can presume what is the clear answer, obviously, in that case. Thank you. Autre question,
Another question. The main estimates for 2018-2019 sets out that global affairs has $48 million for operating expenditures to provide assistance to Canadians abroad. But the departmental report 2016-2017, while the department expects that the total cost of the program for consular assistance will be $134 million. I'm trying to understand why there's that difference between those two numbers.
Yeah, I can speak to that. In the main estimates, the figures that appear are the very direct expenditures that go to providing assistance to Canadians abroad, consular services, and emergency management, whereas in the DPR, it reflects also the indirect expenditures, for example, our platform of missions abroad and the services that are provided throughout the international platform, indirect costs that also support that service.
Mr. Levitt, please. And we have 27.50 seconds to go before the vote.
Minutes?
Minutes. 27 and a half minutes.
So I'm going to be splitting my time with MP Veneveld. I just a couple of questions, both of them really related to our recent travel that my colleague to my left here mentioned to Asia. We just returned from Japan, Korea, and the Philippines a couple of weeks ago, and our focus was on many different issues in terms of building the relationship with these countries, the bilateral relationship, and also a lot of discussion around ASEAN. But one of the areas where there was a great amount of appreciation for Canada and Canada's role was particularly around the Vancouver summit dealing with Korea. And we heard in Korea a great amount of appreciation, and we actually heard it in Japan too, for Canada's leadership in bringing together so many countries to look at the prospects and kind of help chart a path ahead. Wondering if you can, and I don't know who the you is, but wondering if you collectively can provide any sort of feedback on Canada's role, how that summit went, and what Canada's niche can be now as this process moves forward.
Thank you for that question. I would like to start by reminding colleagues of the situation around North Korea not more than about 10 months ago, when missile tests were being conducted, where the level of rhetoric was very extreme, and there was a deep sense of worry that tensions might boil over. It was at that time that Minister Freeland and then Minister Tillerson of the United States agreed that there was an important moment where countries needed to come together and put the emphasis back where it needs to be, which is on a diplomatic solution. And so when 20 countries met in Vancouver in January at the ministerial level, we were very pleased and encouraged that there was a consensus that a diplomatic solution was not only possible, but it was essential, and it was also possible. I think without suggesting any grandiose achievements from that single meeting, I think it was a moment in time where there was a clear determination to change the focus towards diplomacy. And fortunately, I think we would all agree that we're in a better place now with the potential for a summit between President Trump and Kim in the not too many days from now. So it was an example of Canada working with our most important partner and many other countries to try to, again, change the channel, focus on a diplomatic solution that would stabilize the region and be a benefit to all.
Thank you, and I'll say I think it was clear to all members that were on that trip, and we went right up into the DMZ, and certainly in our discussions with senior Korean officials, there was, again, a great amount of appreciation for Canada's role in bringing together that group at the summit and the leadership that we showed. Actually, you know what? At this point, I'm going to pass the floor over to Ms. Vandenbach.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you. And I'm going to go back to the theme of my question. I asked the minister about elections in Venezuela, and I'm very pleased that we downgraded our diplomatic relationship after what was very clearly a fraudulent election. But what are the criteria that we use when we look at elections and whether or not that warrants a downgrading of diplomatic relationships or a response versus we know there are a number of elections around the world where, DRC in 2011, and now you've got a president that's overstayed his constitutional mandate. You've got Honduras in November 2017, where the OAS itself said that they can't guarantee elections were transparent. And I could go on through a whole list of different elections that are questionable or not recognized by certain countries. What do we actually look at? Is there a set of criteria? What is the determination whether that warrants a downgrading of our diplomatic relationship?
So that is an excellent question, and it's a difficult question. In the case of Venezuela, you recently had, as we discussed, and the minister was clear on that, the OAS special panel that reported basically that the findings are that we have systematic attack on the civilian population in Venezuela. So this is like crimes against humanity. The report of the OAS will be submitted actually to the prosecutor at the International Criminal Court, which has launched an investigation. So those matters are utterly serious, and this is really like the highest threshold you could have in terms of we need to do something, we need to take actions, and that's why we had we had sanctions, and we took measures such as you mentioned, downranking our relations or diplomatic relations with Venezuela. In the other cases that you mentioned, in Honduras, for example, the government of Canada and like the advice we provided was a difficult situation. Nobody will claim that those elections were perfect. There was irregularities that were reported on, but at the end of the day, even the electoral monitoring observation mission that we funded, actually that Canada funded, reported that there were irregularities, but there was not a systematic fraud. Therefore, it was a difficult decision, but we decided, like our partners and European allies in the United States, to recognize the government of Honduras, because even though the elections were not perfect, they were still legitimate. But that's a decision that was not taken lightly, and the minister has been very vocal at explaining that Canada actually expects more and better from the government of Honduras in terms of human rights defenders, and for them in Honduras to have the space to do what they need to do and to protect human rights, and that we actually expect the government of Honduras to reform its electoral system, because some of those recommendations were actually made way back in 2009, and the government didn't act on them, and the last election again were difficult. So there are difficult circumstances, and for each and every one of them, we need to make a clear assessment as to what is the best way forward. Should we recognize the government or not? But in the case of Venezuela, like this is a clear, there's no ambiguity, like we're talking about systematic attack on the civilian population.
Colleagues, that'll wrap up our work with the global affairs officials. I want to say thank you very much for taking this time. We've got about 20 minutes before the vote, so I want to thank everyone for their patience of having this special meeting and accommodating some difficult schedules. I know it's late at night, but it's well done and much appreciated. So we'll see you tomorrow at 3:30 if there's not too many votes, and we'll see Minister Bibeau and the officials for the next round of our discussion on this matter. Thank you very much. Meeting adjourned.
you.